Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Education Assessment and Accountability Review Subcommittee. I now call this to order. As we take roll call, I ask the members indicate if they are present from their annex office, or present remotely. At this time, clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Kerr.
I'll get off. Just got to take attendance.
Senator Neal. Senator Wilson. Thank you. Representative Bojanowski.
I'm here and present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Huff. Representative Riley.
Present remotely.
Thank you. Co-chair Wise.
Present remotely out of district.
Thank you. And Representative Reed.
Here in the room. Do we have a quorum?
We have a quorum. We do not have a quorum of senators.
Okay. Good deal. We have a quorum. I'd like to remind all those participating to silence their cell phones. All materials for this meeting have been sent electronically via email and should also be available on the committee's LRC website. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to accept the August 3rd, 2021 minutes. It has been properly moved and second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion passes. The minutes are accepted. All right. At this time, we will now hear a report. The Office of Education Accountability is here to present a report on SEEK funding approved by the subcommittee as part of the 2021 research agenda. This presentation will be broken up in two parts. I ask that you all hold questions and comments until the end of both presentations. For those at the table, if you please introduce yourself for the record, and you may start when you're ready.
Bart LaGuarre, Office of Education Accountability.
Allison Stevens, Office of Education Accountability.
And Sabrina Cummins, OEA.
Thank you all so much for being here today. We truly appreciate you all being here today and presenting this report. I know this report took some time, but it's going to be instrumental in the conversations coming up for the General Assembly, and thank you so much. So at this time, feel free to start your presentation.
Good afternoon. In November of 2020, EARS assigned OEA a study to analyze changes to the current SEEK funding formula to improve equity without increasing state funding. In addition, the report would review other states' funding formulas as well as review rural and non-rural district characteristics in Kentucky. OEA performed a detailed analysis of how the SEEK funding formula and transportation formula are supposed to be calculated based on statute. Several issues were found. Due to these findings, OEA staff will be presenting two presentations today. The first one will be on the SEEK hypothetical changes, and the second presentation will be on what we found during our audit of the SEEK formula, along with the recommendations in the report. "21 states use average daily membership when counting students to fund education. In addition, about a third of states have a higher district local share than Kentucky." OEA staff provides 44 different hypothetical changes to the SEEK funding formula in the report. Several of these changes would increase equity when looking at state and local revenue. However, others had little to no impact on equity. When comparing rural districts to non-rural districts, on average, rural districts have more people living in poverty and more students requiring special education services. They also have more students not meeting ACT reading and math benchmarks. And while their enrollments have been declining, they are projected to lose even more. This slide includes the data used in the report. OEA staff held several meetings with KDE while conducting this study. Our presentation will begin with an overview of how the SEEK funding formula works, followed by how Kentucky compares to surrounding states in K-12 education funding and transportation. In addition, a longitudinal comparison of pre-KERA data compared to present data will be presented before showing you the hypothetical SEEK changes. The presentation will end with major conclusions. At this point, I will turn the presentation over to Allison, who will briefly discuss the SEEK funding formula.
Thank you, Sabrina. The SEEK funding formula was designed to equalize local revenue with state funds to ensure that students living in property-poor districts received the same base funding as students living in property-wealthy districts. In school year 2020, the General Assembly set the guaranteed base per pupil amount to $4,000. SEEK includes additional funding for students with additional needs, referred to as add-ons to the guaranteed base funding formula. There are 5 add-on adjustments, which will be explained on the next slide. To receive state SEEK funding, districts must generate local effort through tax revenue by levying a minimum equivalent tax rate of 30 cents per $100 in taxed property through any combination of property tax, motor vehicle tax, and permissive taxes. Tier 1 allows school boards to increase revenue above 15% of the SEEK base funding and is equalized with state funds for districts with property assessments below 150% of the state average. In school year 2020, this amount was $834,000. School boards can levy up to 30% more of the adjusted SEEK base and Tier 1 for Tier 2 funding, which is not equalized by the state. The at-risk amount for students eligible for free lunch is 15% of the guaranteed base, or $600 per student. The exceptional child add-on has 3 categories. High incidence has a weight of 0.24 or $960 per student. Moderate incidence has a weight of 1.17 or $4,680 per student. And low incidence has a weight of 2.35 or $9,400 per student. Home and hospital represent students who qualify to receive an education at home or while in the hospital, and is the guaranteed base per pupil funding amount less $100 for capital outlay. The LEP add-on, or limited English proficiency, has a weight of 0.096 or $385 per student. The term English learners is sometimes used to describe these students, but we use LEP because it is in statute. Lastly, Kentucky funds students transported to and from school over a mile. Exceptional children receive 5 times the base funding if they require special transportation. We will now move on to looking at Kentucky and surrounding states' funding. This slide shows 3 common types of funding used by surrounding states. Resource-based funding determines the cost of delivering education based on the cost of resources, such as staff salaries and course materials, and is used by 3 surrounding states. Student-based funding assigns a cost to educating a student with no special needs or services, called a base amount, then accounts for the additional cost of educating specific categories of students. Kentucky and 3 surrounding states use this model. Kentucky's base funding is $4,000 per student. And hybrid models use a mixture of student-based and resource-based models. This slide shows how states count students for education funding purposes. 21 states use membership, followed by a single count date and multiple count dates, both used by 9 states. Kentucky and 6 other states use average daily attendance. This method has 2 disadvantages. First, student absences, including excused absences, can bring down the average daily attendance and cause districts to lose funding. Second, students living in poverty are more likely to miss school, which disadvantages districts with higher poverty rates compared to wealthier districts. All surrounding states have an expected local share for funding education, except Indiana. 3 states use multiple data points to calculate local share, while Kentucky requires $3 for every $1,000 in assessed local property wealth. Virginia does not require local effort, but districts may impose taxes to generate supplemental revenue. Some states, like Kentucky, only fund students who qualify for free lunch, while other states fund students who qualify for both free and reduced lunch. Some provide a flat amount, like Indiana, while others provide a multiplier of the base funding, like Kentucky, or based on the concentration of at-risk students, like Missouri. Kentucky and Ohio use multiple weights for the exceptional child add-on, depending on the severity of the exceptionality. Some states use one multiplier or a flat amount per student, regardless of disability. Some states use the cost of delivering special education services, and others use a hybrid system. Kentucky and all surrounding states provide extra funding for limited English proficiency students, or LEP, sometimes referred to as English learners, or EL students. Kentucky and Missouri apply a multiplier to the base funding. Other states base LEP funding on the number of staff needed or provide a flat allocation per student. Kentucky and Tennessee provide funding for rural, remote, or small or isolated districts through their transportation funding formula. Missouri and West Virginia provide funding for districts with a certain number of students, and the remaining surrounding states do not provide additional funding. Kentucky and 6 surrounding states calculate student transportation separately from general education funding. Kentucky and 3 surrounding states have multiple formulas for funding specific categories of student transportation. Many states specify that students must live a minimum number of miles from school before being transported at public expense. 6 surrounding states specify that this distance be measured by route. Limitations range from a minimum of 1 mile to 3.5 miles and can vary by student grade. States generally may transport students living within these set mile minimums under certain circumstances, such as to avoid hazardous routes or when excluding such transportation from funding. Kentucky includes bus depreciation in school transportation funding, ranging from 6% to 12% per year, and depreciation exceeds the cost of the bus. Illinois, Missouri, Virginia, and West Virginia use depreciation rates or replacement schedules, while Indiana and Tennessee include school buses in other funds, and Ohio allows buses to be purchased through competitive bidding. We will now review financial education data in Kentucky over time. Districts were divided into quintiles to compare low property wealth districts with high property wealth districts. Districts were ranked by per pupil property assessments and divided into 5 groups, each with about 1/5 of the state's students. Quintile 1 contains districts with the lowest per pupil property assessments, and quintile 5 contains districts with the highest per pupil property assessments. Equity is measured using the gap between the funding received by quintile 5 and the funding received by lower wealth quintiles, particularly quintile 1. Individual districts within quintiles may experience different outcomes. For example, although equity may increase in quintile 1, some districts within quintile 1 may experience a decrease. This map shows each district's quintile. Remember that each quintile has approximately the same number of students. There are 68 districts in quintile 1, the least wealthy district, primarily in eastern Kentucky, and there are 5 districts in quintile 5, the wealthiest quintile, Anchorage Independent, Jefferson, Fayette, Livingston, and Lyon counties. This slide shows how quintile characteristics have changed over time. And this analysis may look different at different points in time, but here we are looking at pre-CARA and early CARA compared to the most recent years for which data was available. And here we're only looking at the gap between quintile 1, the lowest wealth districts, and quintile 5, the highest wealth districts. Later, we'll look at the gaps between quintiles 1 through 4 compared to quintile 5. In 2020, quintile 1 had an additional 15 districts, but only 900 additional students. Quintile 3 actually decreased in both number of districts and count of students. And compared to 1991, the number and percent of at-risk students and exceptional child students have increased, and the percent of at-risk students increased the most in quintile 5, but the percentage remains lower than quintile 1, and the percent of exceptional child students increased the most in quintile 1. In 1990, the average teacher salary was equal to $53,262 in 2020 dollars. This is slightly less than the 2020 average teacher salary of $53,907. Property wealth increased in each quintile, and the percentage of total property wealth in less wealthy districts came closer to the percentage in wealthier districts. In 1990, 38% of the property wealth was in quintile 5, compared to 33% in 2020. The equivalent tax rate also increased in each quintile, and the gap between quintile 1 and quintile 5 was just 0.9 in 2020 compared to 15.9 in 1990. Local and state revenue increased in each quintile, with greater increases in lower quintiles. Less wealthy districts had more revenue per pupil in 2020 and came closer to the revenue in wealthier districts. The difference was $115 more equitable in 2020. Including federal revenue increases equity even further in 2020 compared to 1990 equity. Looking at expenditures, Kentucky districts spent less on administration and more on instruction in 2018 compared to 1990. About half of 2018 total current expenditures were instruction expenditures, and the difference between expenditures in quintile 5 compared to quintile 1 decreased in each category. I will now turn the presentation over to Sabrina, who will discuss rural versus non-rural districts.
Thank you, Allison. Here are the definitions used to determine which counties are classified as metropolitan, micropolitan, and rural. These definitions are based on the 2010 census data. Independent districts were classified the same as the county district they reside in. There are currently 58 metropolitan districts, 44 micropolitan districts, and 69 rural districts. The next slide is a map of Kentucky and each district classification. Shaded in white on the map are the rural districts, which a large number are in eastern Kentucky. Currently, the rural population is 23% of the total population. However, in 2050, rural districts are projected to only make up 18% of the total population. Metropolitan districts have 58% of the total population, but is projected to increase to 65%. And micropolitan districts, while projected to gain students, their percentage of the population will decrease from 19 to 17%. .5% of people living in rural districts do not have a high school diploma, compared to 22% in micropolitan and 14% in metropolitan areas. In addition, only 11% of the people living in rural districts have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 17% in micropolitan and 25% in metropolitan areas. The weighted average school attendance rates in rural districts are lower than micropolitan and metropolitan districts. Rural districts also have a higher percentage of students needing special education services and have more homeless students. However, rural districts have the least amount of minority students. And rural districts, on average, have lower teacher salaries. In 2020, metropolitan districts' average teacher salaries were almost $7,000 more than rural districts, and micropolitan's average teacher salaries were almost $1,000 more. This table shows the 2019% of students meeting the ACT math and reading benchmarks. Rural districts have much lower rates meeting math and reading ACT benchmarks than their other two cohorts. As shown in this table, rural districts' per pupil property assessments are almost half of what the metropolitan districts have. And when looking at total revenues, rural districts fare a little better than micropolitan districts. Rural districts receive about $74 more per pupil in local, state, and state revenue. And when adding in federal dollars, rural districts receive almost $300 more per pupil than micropolitan districts. We will now move to the hypothetical SEEK adjustments, starting off with adding a rural district add-on weight. This table shows the change in equity between 2020 local and state revenue from quintiles 1 and quintiles 5, when the SEEK guaranteed base is reduced to fund a rural district add-on. Remember, quintile 1 is the property poor districts and quintile 5 are the property rich districts. The first three columns in this slide uses the school year 2020 local and state revenue for all quintiles. So these columns will remain the same in all the hypothetical SEEK adjustments we will show you, because they are before any adjustments have been done to the SEEK formula. The fourth column is the new average per pupil local and state amount when we make any of the hypothetical changes. The next column is the new equity difference from each quintile and quintile 5. Quintile 1's local and state revenue has increased when reducing the base funding to fund the rural add-on. The final column is the change in equity and looks at the 2020 equity difference from each quintile and compares it to the new equity difference to determine if the change increased equity. By reducing the base and including a rural district add-on of 0.239, equity increased in quintile 1 by $629. Quintile 2, equity increased by $290 per pupil, quintile 3 by $110 per pupil, and quintile 4 by $25 per pupil. In addition, you can see that quintile 5 had $11,814 per pupil and is now dropped to $11,606 per pupil. Remember, OEA was asked to not increase state revenue, but to reduce the guaranteed SEEK base by the cost of what any of these adjustments would be. At the bottom of each slide, you will see the changes to the SEEK guaranteed base for each of these analyses. This adjustment would reduce the SEEK guaranteed base from $4,000 to $3,830.95 per pupil to fund this district rural add-on. In addition, if the General Assembly would like to fund any of the models instead of reducing the SEEK guaranteed base, that amount is shown at the bottom of each slide as well. If this was to be funded, it would cost the General Assembly $140.6 million. While the overall equity in Quintile 1 increased, not all districts in that quintile will gain additional funding. The following map shows the districts in Quintile 1 and if their funding increased or decreased. Here's the map of Quintile 1. As you can see, there were 29 districts in Quintile 1 shown in red that lost funding. However, there were 39 districts shown in green on the map in Quintile 1 that gained funding. Next, we will show you the changes to what happened in Quintile 5 districts. As shown in this map, one district will be getting additional funding, while 2 districts will be losing funding. In addition, 2 districts' funding will remain the same as what they received in 2020. Appendix Q in the report will show you the hypothetical SEEK adjustments along with the amount of local and state revenue that increased, decreased, or stayed the same for each district. The next slide will show a hypothetical change to local and state revenue if we added a weight for both rural and micropolitan districts. As shown earlier, micropolitan districts actually receive less revenue than rural districts did. This model decreases the base SEEK amount to $3,798 and takes those funds to add a weight of 0.239 for rural districts and a weight of 0.06 for micropolitan districts. These adjustments increased equity by $667 per pupil in Quintile 1, and Quintiles 2 through Quintiles 4 also increase. The report also has a hypothetical adjustment for small districts and another one based on density, which both improved equity as well. To address concerns that rapidly declining enrollment negatively affects district funding for districts losing students, this model used a 3-year average of attendance data when district students counts decreased for 2 consecutive years. For districts whose attendance did not decline, this model continued to use prior year average daily attendance plus growth. Using this model and reducing the SEEK base to $3,966, equity would increase for Quintile 1 by $44 per pupil. However, equity decreases in Quintile 3. As mentioned in the report, using average daily attendance hurts districts with higher rates of at-risk students. In addition, 21 states use membership when counting students in their funding formula. This change would reduce the SEEK base to $3,700 and Quintile 1 increased in equity by $364 per pupil. Greater increases were seen in Quintile 2 through Quintile 4. This model increases the at-risk add-on to 60%. Increasing to 60% was used due to a 2006 SEEK report by Augenblick and Associates. This study suggested that the current at-risk weight in Kentucky is too low and recommended increasing the weight to 0.6. If this change was made and the guaranteed base was reduced, equity improved in Quintile 1 and Quintile 2. However, equity decreased in Quintile 3 and Quintile 4. The next slide is going to show you an adjustment based on the percentage of students living in poverty. This slide shows you the poverty range and weight for this change. As you can see, each classification is adjusted upward by adding an extra $50 per student as the percent of students qualifying for free lunch increases. 22 states provide at-risk funding based on the concentration of students from low-income households. This table shows that changing the at-risk add-on increased equity in quintile 1 by $24 per pupil, although equity decreased by $10 for quintile 4 per pupil. The full report has several other ways of changing the at-risk add-on factor. Like the prior model, this model uses the percent of students with an exceptionality in each district to reallocate the exceptional child funds. Districts with 15% or fewer of students with an exceptionality received a weight of 2.5 per student with a moderate or high incident disability. Districts with more than 15% of students with an exceptionality received the weight of 2.5 per pupil plus an additional weight of 1.38 per student with a moderate or high incident disability above the 15% threshold. The weight for students with low incident disabilities remained the same at 2.35. If this change was made, the equity would increase by $887 per pupil in quintile 1, and quintiles 2 through 4 would also increase. According to the 2006 report by Augenblick and Associates, there was an additional comment that recommended to increase the exceptional child add-on weights. Following their recommendation, this model increased the weight for low incident disability from 2.35 to 6, increased the weight for moderate incident disabilities from 1.17 to 3, and increased the weight for high incident disabilities from 0.24 to 1.3. This change would increase equity by $306 per pupil in quintile 1, and quintile 2 through 4 would also see increases. Using the Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI inflation calculator, the 2021 buying power of the guaranteed base SEEK per pupil funding amount in 1991 was determined to be almost $4,769. This model adjusts the SEEK guaranteed base for inflation. Equity improves by $156 in quintile 1. However, equity decreases for quintile 4. As mentioned in the report, 2/3 of states have a larger local contribution than Kentucky currently requires. In addition, the SEEK Summit of 2001 held by KDE suggested the same. Local effort is currently set at 30 cents per $100 of assessed value. This model changes local effort to 35 cents. This increase would not cause any districts to increase their current tax rates because the lowest tax rate was 42.4 cents in fiscal year 2020. Due to this adjustment, the state share of SEEK funds would decrease. However, this model includes the same state SEEK appropriations in 2020. This allows for the SEEK guaranteed base per pupil amount to increase from $4,000 per student to $4,219. If this change was made, equity would increase by $350 per pupil in quintile 1, and equity also increases in quintile 2 through quintile 4. This model represents a joint effort for local districts and the state to contribute to SEEK funding by increasing the base per pupil by inflation and changing the local effort to 35 cents. If done, equity increased by $465 per pupil in quintile 1, and quintiles 2 through 4 increased as well. The report has several more models for your review. There is a model for funding foster care students, increasing Tier 1 percentages, and what would happen if teacher retirement or state grants funded outside the SEEK funding formula were instead funded within the SEEK formula. Some of these adjustments increased equity and some did not. The report also discusses some transportation funding changes. However, due to the KDE calculation errors OEA found and the General Assembly not fully funding transportation, an equity analysis was not performed on these suggestions. However, if anyone is interested in these, we would be glad to discuss them after the presentation. We will now discuss the major conclusions of this presentation. Rural districts have more students living in poverty, and students are more likely to be classified as needing special education services. Students living in rural districts had a lower percentage of students meeting ACT reading and math benchmark scores. Rural districts receive less per pupil funding than metropolitan districts. However, rural districts receive more per pupil funding than micropolitan districts. And finally, rural districts on average have lower teacher salaries. All hypothetical changes on this slide increases equity in quintile 1. In addition, all hypothetical changes on this slide also increases equity in quintile 1. These hypothetical SEEK adjustments had little to no equity improvements. This concludes this presentation. However, OEA staff produced a SEEK interactive tool that allows for the SEEK funding formula to be altered and shows the outcome of these changes. Bart will now show you how to use this tool.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Allison. Excuse me while I get myself set up. Pardon me. There we go. Excellent. Give me a moment, pardon me. Thank you. If anybody would want to follow along later on, or if they want to play with this particular visualization later on, the address for it is bit.ly/all caps OEA SEEK. This visualization shows the amount spent by the state on the SEEK program by local school district. This tool is only for school year 2020 and for the add-ons that are currently in SEEK. The map can be manipulated by changing the SEEK guaranteed base, the multipliers for the SEEK add-ons, and the local effort, the equalization level, and the tier 1 percentage. Below the map and to the left, the visualization displays the change required in the maximum levied equivalent rate in order to maximize tier 1 funding. Above the color gradient is a total change in SEEK funding relative to the 2020 appropriation. I'm now going to walk you through some changes that you can make to the visualization. In one of the SEEK task force meetings, Chuck Truesdell mentioned that for every dollar you add to the SEEK base, it'll cost approximately $800,000. So I want to replicate that here with this particular visualization. So we select SEEK base, manually type in $4,001, and hit enter. You will then see, right down here on the bottom, the difference is approximately $800,000. So Chuck Truesdell got it right, which is good. Sabrina mentioned earlier that we ran a model of having the at-risk add-on increase to 0.60. I'm going to hit this button right here, which takes us all the way back and it resets the whole visualization, and I'm going to increase the SEEK add-on to 0.60. You'll see at the very bottom that the difference is approximately $702.9 million. That was what was written in that was what was written in the presentation. I'm now going to reset it, and I'm going to go over one more benefit of this tool. Another benefit of this tool is that you'll be able to implement more than one change at a time. For this particular change, we're going to decrease the Seek add-on from 4,000 to 3,900. So I'm going to write in 3,900, hit enter. I'm going to increase the Seek add-on, the Seek at-risk add-on to 0.2, and increase the Special Education Low Incidence add-on to 0.3. You will then see how much it will cost the state down here, and which districts would benefit most and least from this change. The colors on the map display the extent to which changes in the Seek formula would increase or decrease spending in those districts. The orange colors show a decrease in spending, while the blue colors show an increase in state spending. Below the map, the visualization displays the biggest and smallest changes in state spending per AADA by district for the selected changes to the Seek formula. So in other words, the biggest winners and the biggest losers in this particular situation. Rolling over the districts displays an itemized summary of the changes to the state funding in Seek. I would be glad to stay after this meeting if anyone would like to work with this tool in more detail. I actually really love this stuff, so it'll be a lot of fun. Or at least for me. That being said, I now want to transition to the other presentation. Give me a moment.
Just one moment. Does any member have any questions for the first presentation that we heard? We good? All right. All right, sir.
Oh, hold on one second. Excuse me one second, just having some technical difficulties here.
If we could just take one moment while you
Certainly.
bring up your presentation, we're going to take up another item of business, if that's okay. We have a quorum of senators with us online. At this time, we're going to transition to item number 3 on the agenda. And first order, the business will be required by statute is the election of Senate co-chair. Senate members will elect the Senate co-chair. Is there a nomination from a Senate member for the position of Senate co-chair of this committee?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Wilson.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Senator Max Wise as co-chair of EARS Committee.
It's been properly moved. Is there a second?
Has to be second.
I second that.
Senator Neal, you second it. Thank you, sir. So Senator Wilson has nominated Senator Wise. There has been properly seconded. Is there any other nominations? All right. At this time, there's been properly moved and seconded, and the motion has been made and seconded by nomination cease. Is there a motion to cease the nominations at this time? It has been so moved. All those in favor of Senator Wise being elected as co-chair of this committee, please signify by saying aye among the senators.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations, Senator Wise. You have been elected for this duty for another term. Congratulations. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Now we will go back to the regular order of business, and you may continue your presentation. Thank you, sir, for the interrupt.
Thank you. This presentation is a thorough examination of the SEEK formula as it is currently implemented by KDE. There are 16 recommendations based on our examination. We will first discuss the major findings, followed by a deep dive into the SEEK transportation formula. We then discuss other issues related to transportation costs, recording entries in district activity funds, and end with briefly discussing issues with SEEK and preschool and kindergarten. This slide includes the data used for the findings in this part of the presentation. OEA staff had several meetings with KDE staff and used several pieces of data that districts submitted to KDE, as well as the SAS code and output used to calculate transportation funding. I will now discuss the major findings from the transportation calculation. Before presenting them to you, we have discussed these issues with KDE and made them aware of them. We appreciate their help and have been in communication with them all throughout the year and presented our initial findings to them in July. KDE calculated the square mileage incorrectly for county districts with independent districts within their borders. KDE did not audit districts' transportation codes for students transported more than a mile correctly. KDE grouped districts into 7 groups instead of 9 groups for the transportation graph adjustment. In creating the 7 cost groups, KDE did not use an objective methodology of grouping districts. Instead, it used a subjective methodology to determine different groupings of districts. KDE grouped districts into small groups by calculated cost per pupil day instead of density groups. KDE multiplied the number of handicapped students by 2.0 instead of 5.0 as required by statute. While reviewing the 2019 annual financial reports, we found districts with transportation expenses to and from school that did not transport students. District activity funds are not required to be recorded in Munis. Districts are receiving the Exceptional Child Add-on for preschool students. And in the 2021 regular session, full-day kindergarten was added for fiscal year 21-22. However, the equalization level did not change. Now we're going to go into SEEK transportation more in depth. Here's a little bit about SEEK transportation. Districts are reimbursed for transporting students to and from school. SEEK transportation does not include transportation for field trips or sports. Also, most all districts transport students to and from school. And there is a complex formula associated with transportation that is complicated and not implemented correctly by KDE. Also, Kentucky has not fully reimbursed school districts for their transportation costs since 2004. In school year 2020, the total cost for pupil transportation was $392 million. In school year 2020, districts received a prorated amount of 54.8% of their cost for pupil transportation. There are 2 issues that we found initially, and we want to make recommendations based on them. Statute requires that the area of independent school districts be subtracted from the county district of the county they are in. In discussions with KDE staff, OEA determined that for county districts that had independent districts within their county, KDE did not subtract the square mileage for the independent districts from the area served by the county district. Also, statute requires that the ADA of transported pupils includes all public school pupils transported at public expense who live beyond a 1-mile radius from the school. KDE staff calculates students' distance from school based on road miles rather than a 1-mile radius, which conflicts with statute. By using road miles instead of radius, districts may be including students that should not be included in this calculation. Recommendation 4.1 deals with the square mileage of county districts with independent districts within their border. Recommendation 4.2 deals with calculating mileage by a 1-mile radius instead of road miles. KRS 157370 sets out the requirements for calculating transportation reimbursements. These are the major requirements. There should be 9 density groups. There should be smooth graphs created. County and independent districts are calculated separately. No independent district should get more per pupil day than any county district. Also, the attendance of students with disabilities should be multiplied by 5.0. To calculate transportation costs, KDE uses two variables as inputs: the gross transported pupil density and the cost per pupil day. In looking at the SAS program code, OEA found that the number of handicapped students was multiplied by 2.0 instead of 5.0 as required by statute. Also, right here, the gross ADA plus handicapped amount was used in determining the cost per pupil day. Because the number is in the denominator, each handicapped student lowers the cost per pupil day. This penalizes districts with more handicapped students. The gross pupil density is plotted on the x-axis, and the cost per pupil day is plotted on the y-axis. KDE staff then used professional judgment to exclude districts from the graph calculations that they viewed as outliers. County and independent districts that had transported costs per pupil day above $9, that's this line, or below $3 were excluded from the graph calculation in school year 2020. Based on this, there were 7 density groups: county and independent districts above $9, county and independent districts between $3 and $9, and county and independent districts below $3, and also there were 4 districts that did not transport students. And these are the issues that arose from that. According to statute, the transportation calculation should have 9 density groups in determining the graph-adjusted cost per pupil day. The KDE calculation only includes 7 groups, and instead of using similar density groups as required by statute, KDE is grouping school districts by calculated cost per pupil day. KDE chose to group these districts using their subjective methodology rather than having an objective methodology. We recommend they use an objective methodology in the future. Statute requires that the students with disabilities have their ADA multiplied by 5.0. While the handicap factor was correct on the website, in calculating the graph-adjusted costs, KDE did not multiply the costs by 5.0 and multiplied the cost by 2.0. KDE was not aware of the error because they lacked the expertise in the program used to calculate the graph adjustment. The gross ADA plus handicapped amount was used in determining the cost per pupil day. Because the handicap factor was used in determining the cost per pupil day, each handicapped student made the denominator larger when calculating cost per pupil day. The larger denominator in the cost per pupil day led to lower graph-adjusted cost per pupil day for each handicapped student. Recommendation 4.3 addresses the number of groups and methodology for the graph calculation. Recommendation 4.4 addresses KDE using an objective methodology in determining groups for graph calculations. Recommendation 4.5 addresses KDE using the wrong multiplier for students with disabilities. Recommendation 4.6 addresses KDE using the handicap factor in the denominator when calculating the cost per pupil day. Districts that have a cost per pupil day between $3 and $9 are separated into 2 categories: county and independent districts. These 2 groups are separately fitted to this nonlinear regression model right here. The coefficients A and B from the nonlinear regression model are calculated. Separate coefficients are calculated for county and independent districts. Coefficients from the nonlinear regression model are then used to determine the graph-adjusted cost per pupil day using these formulas. Districts that are not included in the graph are given the lowest adjusted cost per pupil day of any county district. The county district with the lowest graph-adjusted cost per pupil day has always been Jefferson County. This graph shows the graph-adjusted cost per pupil day and net transported pupil densities for county districts. Within the county district graph calculation, 117 of the 120 county districts were included in the graph. For several years up until 2021, KDE made an error in transcribing district's graph calculated cost, with one district, this diamond here, receiving too much money. This was due to a mistake in the computer program. Due to this error, that district received $100,000 more than what they were to be reimbursed in fiscal year 2020. KDE has since noticed the error and corrected it for future years. The 3 districts that were not included in the graph calculation received $5.78 per pupil day, which was Jefferson County's graph-adjusted cost per pupil day. The 2 districts that had the greatest costs of any county districts are shown with an X, so they're right here. They had costs above $9 per pupil, so they wouldn't be on this graph. They're right up here. However, they received the same costs as Jefferson County, right here, at $5.78 per pupil day. Instead of bringing them down to the Jefferson County level, it would have made more sense to bring them down to the highest county that was included in the graph, which would be right here. So instead of bringing them from here all the way down here, they should have been brought down from here, maybe to here, $7.21. This graph shows the graph-adjusted cost per pupil day and net transported pupil densities for independent districts. Within the independent district graph calculation, 40 of the 48 districts that transported students were included in the graph calculation. After the graph adjustment formula was applied, 5 districts had graph-adjusted costs above Jefferson County. Those are the circles right here, those empty circles. They were brought down to the Jefferson County level. There were 3 districts that were not included in the graph that had the highest costs of any district in the Commonwealth. Those are the plus signs right here. Those 3 districts that had the highest cost received the same amount as Jefferson County per pupil day as required by statute. Then there were 5 districts that were not included in the graph calculation because they had costs below $3 per pupil day. So these 5 districts had costs that were below $3 per pupil day. So all the way down here and a little bit further even. They were brought all the way up here to the $5.78. It might have made more sense to bring them up to this level, right here, the same amount as the lowest independent district on the graph. And these are the issues that we turned up. For several years up until 2021, an error in transcribing districts' graph-adjusted costs led to one district receiving too much money. Also, any district not included in the graph calculation was given the same graph-adjusted cost per pupil day as Jefferson County. Recommendation 4.7 addresses the county districts with the highest cost per pupil day being brought down to the same level as the county district with the lowest cost per pupil day. It also addresses the independent districts with the lowest cost per pupil day being reimbursed at the same level as the independent districts with the highest costs per pupil day. And this is an issue that we had come across. The SEEK transportation component is calculated using the SAS statistical software package. In 2002, an LRC report noted that KD officials indicated that no one in the Division of School Finance understood the SAS program code. The report went on to say if the program should experience a problem and start to produce inaccurate information, division staff may have difficulty identifying the problem. Thus, in addition to improving the validity of the data used in the calculation, KDE should improve the process and the staff's understanding of the process. In speaking with KDE staff, nothing has changed in KDE's understanding of the program code. Furthermore, without the expertise in the SAS program code, KDE was unaware of any of the mistakes that were made in calculating the graph-adjusted transportation costs. There were many instances where the calculations that were completed in SAS didn't match what was posted on the KDE website. We would recommend that KDE follow the recommendations of the 2002 LRC report. Also, regulation requires that net ADA for county districts pupils transported 1 mile or more to school shall be determined from the local superintendent's annual statistical report for the district, which is the SAR. The language in this regulation should more accurately describe which statistical report it is referencing, and KDE should consider posting the data from the report to its website. Recommendation 4.8 addresses KDE not being able to understand the SEEK transportation calculations or the programs used to calculate SEEK transportation. It is in agreement with the findings from the 2002 LRC report. Recommendation 4.9 addresses the statistical report that is named in regulation. We recommend that the report is named accurately and the data posted to the KDE website. During the 2021 regular session, the General Assembly passed HB 208. This bill allowed school districts to use 2018-2019 attendance data in calculating SEEK, pursuant to SB 177 of the 2020 regular session. While KDE is calculating the SEEK attendance correctly, they use the 2018-2019 bus depreciation in the SEEK calculation, which is not allowed in this bill. They should have updated the school district's vehicle depreciation schedules in calculating transportation costs. Also, statute requires KDE to regulate the depreciation of school transportation vehicles. The regulation allows KDE to depreciate districts' vehicles 124% over a period of 14 years. This was initially instituted in order to incentivize districts to purchase more fuel-efficient diesel vehicles and retire gasoline-powered buses. There are no longer any gasoline-powered buses. Staff determined that if buses were depreciated for 10 years and at 100%, the unprorated transportation costs would decrease from $392 million to $387 million, and transportation would be funded at 55.4%. The difference in the state portion of Tier 1 would approximately be $309,000. Recommendation 410 recommends the depreciation of school transportation vehicles for 10 years and at 100% instead of 14 years and 124%. There are some other issues that OEA found in recording transportation costs. In the past, when an independent district merged with a county district, the prior year cost of transportation expenses and depreciation was not included with the county district transportation funding for the first year of the merger. This shortchanged county districts in transportation funding for that first year of the merger. Also, KRS 158-115 allows county governments to spend money from their general funds to provide transportation for pupils attending non-public schools. Several local boards of education contract with their local fiscal court to provide such transportation. These expenses are reimbursed each year. These students are not being counted in the transportation calculation. However, there is no consistency in the manner in which they are recorded in Munis. KDE does not provide guidance on how to include the information in Munis. One Northern Kentucky district received $581,000 in fiscal year 2020 from its fiscal court for transporting private school students. The reimbursement should have been recorded as a negative expense. It was not. Because of this, the district overstated its transportation expenses by over $500,000. Of the 7 districts contacted about this issue, there was only one independent district that was recording the revenue correctly. Also, while reviewing fiscal year 2019 annual financial reports, there were 2 independent districts that had no transported students, but reported transportation expenses. Based on these issues, we make the following 3 recommendations. This is the recommendation for independent districts that merge with county districts. Recommendation 413 relates to the transportation of non-public school students. And recommendation 414 relates to districts reporting transportation costs despite not transporting students to and from school. There were issues OEA found related to district activity funds. KDE does not currently require districts to record district activity funds in Munis. Without recording the data into Munis, it would be difficult to determine the extent to which district activity funds have an impact on equity. OEA reviewed 2 districts with similar ADA that had their district activity funds entered into Munis. District A is a wealthier district with fewer low-income students. District B is a poorer district with more low-income students. District A received approximately $300 per student of local funds for district activity funds, while District B only received $6 per student in local funding. Based on this, we make recommendation 412, which is for KDE should require districts to record their district activity funds on their annual financial reports. There are also issues OEA found related to SEEK and preschool and kindergarten. KRS 157-3175, Section 3, requires preschool programs to be funded by a grant from the General Assembly to local school districts. Preschool students are not included in the SEEK base funding and receive grant funding separate from SEEK. However, preschool students are receiving the SEEK Exceptional Child Add-on. In fiscal year 2020, there were over 2,500 preschool students that districts received SEEK funding for exceptional children at a cost of $8.2 million. So OEA recommends that KDE should discontinue using preschool students in calculating the exceptional child add-on in the SEEK formula. Also, each biennium, the General Assembly determines the equalization level. The equalization level is 150% of average per pupil assessments. When funding full-day kindergarten in HB 382 of the 2021 regular session, the budget included kindergarten students in districts' per pupil assessments. This had the effect of increasing the denominator, prior year ADA plus growth, but not the numerator, total district assessments. When adding the kindergarten ADA, districts' per pupil assessments were lowered. The equalization level, which was set at the beginning of the biennium, did not change. By not changing the equalization level and decreasing per pupil assessments, the ratio between per pupil assessments to equalization level, it was lowered. This impacted Tier 1 and the facilities nickels that are equalized. Based on that, OEA recommends that if full-day kindergarten were funded in the future, the General Assembly should consider changing the statewide equalization level in order to accurately reflect 150% of per pupil assessments. That is the end of the second presentation and of our presentation, and we thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we are certainly available. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We know you're going to give your report again to the SEEK task force, and we're also going to take this report and also give it to appropriations and revenue so we can also take a look at it. Is there any questions at this time? Yes, Representative Bojanowski.
All right. I'll probably have a lot once I can read through it. So next Monday, maybe. But
yeah,
today,
if we can maybe just one question today,
Yeah.
we have another item of business that we need to take up. So maybe the SEEK task force will probably be the appropriate
okay.
place. Yeah.
Just real quickly so I can understand. So you said something about the preschool students and calculating exceptional child add-on. So preschool students don't count. You don't get SEEK money for preschool students, correct? So was just the total number of special education preschool students used for that calculation?
It was used to determine the add-ons. So the special education add-on, the exceptional child add-on, it was used for that, but not the base funding.
Okay, so say you had 100 preschoolers in addition, there would have been 100 more times of whatever the add-on percent is.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions at this time? All right, seeing none. The chair Senator Wilson, excuse me. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one. When you talk about activity funds, can you tell me exactly what that is?
I'll defer to Sabrina on that just to get a more complete answer.
There's actually two types of activity funds. There are student activity funds and district activity funds. The National Center for Education Statistics, who models what the finance of school districts should be, actually states that these should be recorded in the financial system so that you can actually see how much total revenue is collected. For district activity funds, they are mainly school fees, parking fees, sporting, when you go to a sporting event and you have to pay to get into that. Any fee for textbooks or anything like that is considered district activity funds. That's what is not being mandated. What KDE is requiring, though, are school activity funds, which are basically the money that is collected for, say you were in the Beta Club or the band club or any sort of club. That is a student activity, while everything else for fee-related and gate admissions are district funds and therefore should be recorded in the system as well.
Okay, but student activity funds, you're not saying they need to be included?
KDE has mandated those to be in there, and this will be the first year that everybody is supposed to be putting the student ones in there. They have not mandated the district activity funds, which several high schools in the state, especially The richer districts that can afford to impose these fees collect a lot of revenue on.
But say, for instance, quarterback club, if they go out and raise $60,000 for the football team for their equipment, because the school doesn't get any money for that, that then has to be reported to as well.
If it's a club that has a fundraiser, that is currently being recorded.
Okay.
However, the district funds are not, which are, like I said, the fees and any gate receipt money for football, basketball, which equates to a lot of money for high schools.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you very much. The chair will now entertain a motion to accept the report. It's been properly moved in second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. Motion passes. Thank you all so much. We appreciate your service to the Commonwealth. All right. At this time, we'll move on to item number 5. Each year, the subcommittee performs its oversight function by approving the research agenda for the Office of Education Accountability for the following year, just like the report we just heard. Please submit any proposed research topics to the co-chairs or committee staff. Staff from the OEA will be available if there are any questions. We will approve the 2022 research agenda at a November meeting, so please get your suggestions and questions into Lauren Bush by Tuesday, December 12th. And the chair at this time will stand at ease for just a moment. At this time, the chair calls the meeting back to order. Is there a motion for the committee to go into a closed session pursuant to KRS 7.4102C4 for the purpose of considering the confidential reports submitted to the committee by the Office of Education Accountability? It's been properly moved. Do we have a second? And second, we are now going into an executive session. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion passes. We're now going into an executive session exempt from the Open Meetings Act in accordance with KRS 7.4102C4. When we return to the open meeting, it will be solely for the purpose of adjournment. I ask that any individuals that are not members of the committee or authorized LRC staff to please vacate the room at this time. If you are participating in the meeting room via Zoom and are not confirmed to be a member of this committee,